Welcome to another episode of the Barron Report Live. This is the podcast that talks about all things innovation in restaurant, hospitality, and business. And today's no different. We're going to be talking about some very interesting companies, new technologies, a ton of stuff. Let's start it off with Zume Pizza snagging $375 million and what this means for online delivery and kind of the future of it. OpenTable versus Resy, and who will win the table wars in terms of reservations, and should restaurants be thinking about their social media in a whole new way? Let's just kind of get into it. First up is Zume Pizza. Zume Pizza, if you maybe have not had or had a chance to see them or hear about them, we've kind of talked about this company before. And the issue with Zume Pizza, they kind of started as a pizza delivery company that had robots. The idea was pretty simple and straightforward, but they have evolved, and Softbank has popped in $375 million into this company. And the idea is that Zume will be creating a platform, meaning a robotic preparation platform, or what I consider cook-on-the-way technology, that potentially they'll license to other restaurants, maybe chains, fast casual concepts, QSRs, things of that nature, as well as obviously pizza companies, and moving out into the on-demand space. Now, there are some things that I think that are good and somewhat I feel a bit optimistic in this area, and that is just on-demand and delivery. I think that has continued to explode. Obviously, Uber has a lot to say about that because they are one of the biggest companies out there. However, they have one of the biggest flaws in potentially food delivery, and that is the fact that it is a third party. Where Zume is trying to go about this is using a direct to the restaurant concept itself. So it would be the restaurant concept themselves as the delivery mechanism, and in fact being cooking on the way. So audience on that's around 200K if you look at all the restaurants in fast casual, QSR, and maybe some of the casual dining concepts that would kind of go into that. Now, where I see this as a little bit of a challenge is pizza delivery. Pizza delivery right now is actually down 18% year over year based on Foodable Labs data. Now, what I think is causing that is the fact that you've got all this great choice in fast casual, you've got Uber Eats, and all of the online apps that are providing just really kind of a whole new plethora of options for a diner that's maybe at home or at work. And what used to be kind of controlled by the pizza industry is now just so diversified in all these different options. So I think that's what's contributing to the downturn in pizza delivery in terms of comparison of other applications. Some other things that I think can kind of fall into this, and that is the packaging issue around, and this is where Uber kind of falls down. Obviously, they're taking the package directly from the restaurant, but in many cases, the restaurant may not necessarily have packaging that's designed for an Uber driver delivery. So if Uber continues to work on creating a logistics advantage, meaning they might be doing multiple deliveries, much like if you look at Uber and how they do their delivery of people, which is where they start, trying to use the logistics application to reduce cost, that could be a scenario where food hold times will become a major issue with Uber delivery. And that's where we get into food safety. Packaging is going to have to change. There's a lot that could happen here. So with that being the fact, then you look at someone like Zume, who potentially is cooking it on the way, completely removes the packaging requirement and completely removes the issue around, or for the most part, issue around food safety. I think that will be the thing that we'll continue to see. We're going to continue to try to track this story and kind of the technologies overall as technology hits this space. One thing we did do here recently is we actually did a video here on Foodable that talked about some of the pizza tech that was being used. So take a look at this and you kind of get an idea of what we're looking at.
Zume Pizza utilizes multiple robots in their brick-and-mortar facilities. With the addition of human labor, Zume is able to make about 120 pizzas an hour. Each robot is named and tasked with a specific job. Giorgio and Pepe layer on the sauce, Marta spreads it evenly, Bruno slides the pies into the oven, and Vincenzo removes them. With the growing amount of restaurants utilizing automation, it brings up the question, what about the current employees? A 2017 report states between 6 million and 7.5 million U.S. jobs are at risk in the upcoming years due to automation. But Alex Garden, CEO of Zume Pizza, doesn't see it that way. Cobotics, a concept Garden defines as automation complementing rather than replacing human labor, allows for repetitive work to be minimized and ultimately free people up for higher value work.
All right, so you can kind of see technology is really advancing in the food service space, and we'll continue to see, I think, a lot of this moving forward, especially with labor costs continuing to rise, and the fact that we still are in a very challenged market space in terms of overall availability of people wanting to work in this space. We'll move on to our next topic, and this is one that really is kind of interesting, and it's really all about the reservation applications. This is kind of the table wars. When you look at what's happening on OpenTable and Resy and kind of the rest, there was a recent piece done over on Lifehacker that kind of showed how these particular platforms were working. And with the recent acquisition of Reserve by Resy, this could really heat up these wars. So what we decided to do is kind of break into the actual operator and consumer usage of these applications and services. So we're going to break down a little bit about how they came about in terms of disrupting food service online reservations and the companies that essentially are in the game right now. So obviously you have OpenTable, the big leader, but you also have companies like Reserve, Resy. You also have companies like Diner, which is a great Canadian group, which are kind of focusing on last-minute cancellations, and then Talk, which also sells prepaid tickets to high-end tasting menus. A little bit different than the typicals Reserve, Resy, and OpenTable, but definitely in the same framework of eating out and kind of booking through your phone or your computer. These are the things that we looked at that tried to determine how these apps and how these services were doing. So we took a look at operator sentiment first from Foodable Labs in kind of the top 4 services, and these were OpenTable, Resy, Reserve, and Diner, to establish kind of where operators kind of stood. OpenTable, who was acquired by Priceline for $2.6 billion in 2014, they lead the pack. Now, their penetration is 68% of the top 1,000 chefs in operations. And when you look at their overall growth of where they are in their entire restaurant group, which has 50,000 restaurants using the OpenTable service, pretty much in line there. So from there, we kind of looked at where operator sentiment fell. Now, operator sentiment is what the operators themselves, these are chef, multi-unit operators that use OpenTable, think about the platform. The rating, operator sentiment, 92.4 on Resy versus OpenTable at a significantly lower rating of 80.4, and then Reserve comes in at 81.3, Diner 76.4, Talk comes in at 75.7. I think that really is just an awareness issue for them. But what's interesting here, and this is the thing that I think really is the story behind this, and that is where consumer sentiment plays out. Now things flip positions, and that is where OpenTable and Resy basically change places. 94.3 versus OpenTable, and that's OpenTable, versus an 80.5 for Resy. Now this is consumer sentiment, so how people that are using the app to book a reservation think about the service. Obviously, OpenTable uses a lot of the point systems that you can acquire and you get some free stuff, but overall the experience on OpenTable appears from a consumer standpoint to be really kind of top of mind. Frequency was another aspect, which is really a huge winner here, I think. OpenTable at 4.8 times per month from the data set of 25,000 food influencers. This is a pretty good frequency number. If I look at the way that I eat out, I'm using OpenTable quite a bit. I have used Reserve and Resy, and it's pretty interesting that these kinds of applications are kind of becoming defaults and go-tos for the average diner. So my observation here is, consumers are in love with this service. They love the fact that they can, one, find the restaurants, book them online, kind of take a look at what's available, and really kind of build their entire week around it. I know we're on OpenTable 2 or 3 times a week and booking well in advance in many cases, so you can book out reservations way out in advance. Same thing with Resy and Reserve. Lots, I think, yet to grow in this landscape. So innovation is going to be the key factor, and These guys have got to learn how to keep their restaurants happy, whether it's the service fees or the benefits that they can provide to the restaurant operator. That's really kind of the big factor that is yet to be explored. There'll be some new models, I'm sure, and I kind of think this is really going to continue to expand. Now, we've done some research on online delivery, online reservations, and the such, much like the last two stories I talked about. And you can get this research basically through our Foodable Labs portal, which lives inside Foodable TV. So if you just go to foodable.tv.com/Foodable-reports, that'll take you to a page where you can download some free, some paid. You'll also see a chance to join Foodable Plus. I won't go into that now, but check it out. I think you're going to really love it. The last topic today is really, I think, the headline of the episode, and that is really to talk about social restaurant visits. Now, social restaurant visits, so I can explain what these are. This has been something we've been studying for almost a decade. And what we look at and compile as a social restaurant visit are when people are saying, hey, I'm going to take a photo of my food today, and that puts me at a Panera. I'm going to say, hey, Nathan, join me for lunch today. That gives me an intent to visit. Those are the kind of things that we look at to determine how social restaurant visits are essentially scored. This past year was the first time that we had seen a significant drop. Now, we've seen declines in social restaurant visits, but never to this level. 29.6% down. Now, this is an amazing stat. Now, there are some factors here that I think contribute to this number. So it's not necessarily meaning that we've dropped 30%. Where I think this is coming from are really kind of three areas. One area is the closures of restaurants. There's just less restaurants than there has been in the past, at 62,000 restaurants closing here year to date in 2018. I think that has a big factor. Another factor is the downturn in frequency of social media use, which is at 11.3% across platforms, all platforms by chefs and emerging brands. Now, 11.3% you might not think is a ton. That is a pretty significant downturn in overall social media use by the brands and the chefs. So they're basically putting less content out there to talk about their restaurants. Now, maybe that's a good thing because maybe we've kind of got to a point where we've groomed our messaging on social. There's probably quite a bit of underlying aspects around that in terms of data and the whole issues with Facebook and what's happened there over the past year. Which also could apply to this last stat, and that is that consumer digital engagement is down 18.4%. Now let's talk about what engagement means. That's where I put out a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram and you react to it. You give me a heart or you retweet it or you comment on Facebook. That's an engagement factor. Now, there may be some social media fatigue here, and I think that really starts to line up the question of what your social media strategy is. So if you look at these numbers, which is really a staggering shift in digital behavior in food service, as a brand, you have to be looking at what are some of the things you're going to do in terms of changing. Let's take a look at Instagram, for instance, which has outpaced user growth in the food influencers area with 72.9% using the platform versus, this is food influencers, versus 52.3% using Facebook. Now, this is a pretty dynamic example of why Facebook purchased Instagram. This is an interesting factor. And of course, if you go over to Twitter, which is the kind of the outlier here, their attention in terms of holding attention by food service influencers is 60.8% using the platform. So still, Twitter is a very strong platform for these influencers. There are some factors there. I think obviously you might even be watching this over on Twitter right now live. There are some things that are happening on Twitter that I think still make it a really viable product. Facebook is the one that's very interesting to me to see the fall off in terms of influencer usage, not necessarily overall usage, but definitely influencer usage in the food service space. Let's talk about that frequency factor and really kind of the movement there. I think that is something that if it continues to see a downturn, and I think some things might settle down in 2019 as we move forward, in terms of the restaurant closings could start to slow a bit. And I think we'll see brands and chefs kind of get their feet under them in terms of the strategies that they want to use on social media moving forward. A lot of this, I think, will play into this whole privacy movement that we're seeing in the millennial crowd. And what I mean by that is with, of course, Facebook having some challenges around privacy all around the political arena. If you look at the challenges just that our society has faced, that may have some overall effect on social media as a whole. So where do I think that the future holds potential opportunities? That's where we get into these new platforms. And those are things like what you're viewing today. And that is really original content that operators, chefs, and brands alike can utilize new distribution platforms to get that information out there. So whether you're viewing maybe something on your blog that you're getting into Apple News, a podcast like the Barron Report that is either going out on YouTube and also making it over to our standard RSS distribution on the podcast networks. And then you have this whole layer of on-demand. And this is where the cord cutters start to really play into it. And if you think about it, where social media was before, or I should say where content marketing was before social media, was mostly in content consumption platforms, meaning whether they were magazines or email, things of that nature, where people were consuming content to get information. It wasn't the kind of thing that you're dealing with where you have this push model of content in terms of social media. So I think that we may see some of this cord cutting, meaning when I'm ready to consume content, now I'm ready to jump on to iTunes or Spotify and listen to a few podcasts. Or when I'm ready to consume content, I'm going to lean back on my couch and watch Amazon Prime and check out what kind of education topics or what kind of new restaurants and bars are in my city. So I think that's kind of where we see the future around this. And as you guys continue to watch here on the Barron Report, we'll look at more topics like this each week. We also are looking for some great guests. So if you have some ideas or guests that you would love to see on the show, we'll bring them in via our tech or maybe right here in studio. Shoot us an email to producer@foodabletv.com. We'd love to hear from you. Obviously, if you're checking this out over on iTunes or on Spotify after our live portion of the show here, make sure and leave a comment, give us a star, or let us know what you think about the show. We'd love to hear that. Thanks again for listening in or watching right here on the Barron Report. We'll catch you next time.